Welcome to the Rook Chess Club's YouTube channel. In today's video, we're going to be going over a game played between Siegbert Tarrasch with the white pieces and Edmund Thorold with the black pieces. This game was played in 1890 in Manchester, and it starts with pawn to e4, pawn to e6, the French defense, d4, d5, and if you know anything about Tarrasch, you already know his next move. He doesn't take, he doesn't push, he plays knight to d2, and this is actually called the Tarrasch variation of the French. And the idea is with knight to d2, you're not putting it on c3 because you want to play with that c3 pawn, probably to defend or maybe even to attack later in the game. And it defends the pawn. So after pawn to c5, black just attacks the center normally with the French. That's the whole point, is you want to get c5 on the board. If you're not playing c5 with the French, you're doing something wrong. Capture, queen captures, and now the knight develops. Now if we look here, there's two attackers on this pawn. There's one defender. So white is sacrificing a pawn here and black accepts. But we're not too worried about this because we have good development and this pawn is really weak right now. There's one attacker, but in one move I can bring my knight to b3. And by doing that, I'm going to have both knights attacking that pawn and the queen. So Tarrasch plays bishop to c4, attacking the queen, getting some tempo. Queen has to run away. It can't check the king because both the knights are guarding those center squares. Castle kingside. And if we look, white has some great development here. It's a great compensation for the piece. Black plays knight to c6. And we might be thinking, well, why don't we just defend with e5? Because this looks like a pretty natural move. We got a good pawn chain. The queen's defending here. Well, if we did this, these pawns actually aren't protected because we can simply play knight takes on e5. And if the rook tries to capture the knight, we have a pin. And we're going to win the queen. And if the queen tries to take the queen, instead of capturing back, we're going to play bishop takes on f7 check. And as the king gets out of check, now we'll recapture the queen. And if we look at all this development that we have. Black has not castled. The pawn is still weak. White is already up a pawn here. This is completely winning. So e5 looks like a good move, but really is a big mistake. So knight to c6, let's develop. Let's stop any checks along this diagonal, and let's defend the pawn. So good move. Now knight to b3. Again, we see how all these pieces are attacking the d4 pawn. We're going to get that back. Pawn to e5, and now knight takes e5. So we already talked about this move. We're hitting the queen. The queen cannot take the knight again because it will be pinned by the rook. And so black exchanges queens, takes the knight, and white has got the pawn back. They've lost the knight, but now after rook to e1, we pin the knight to the king, so the knight cannot move or will be in check. Pawn to f6, pawn to f4, and we're going to get that knight back. Bishop to b4. This is a great move. The idea is to hit the rook, and white has a big chance to make a mistake here. So see if you can find the best move for white here. All right, so the best move is bishop to d2. That's what was played in the game. If we try to play something like rook to e2, this looks just as good. We're continuing to pin the knight. We can't move away from this open file or else we'll just lose the knight. So if we tried to defend like this, right, now black is actually winning by 6 points. White is going to lose the game. So we have to keep it on this open file so that we can grab this knight. So if we try to play rook to e2, now we have bishop to g4, and look at all the squares that are being attacked. The only way to stay on this file and regain the knight is to play rook to e4. Bishop goes back, rook goes back, bishop goes back, rook goes back. This is going to be a draw. So because of that, when bishop comes to b4, we have to block it. Bishop to d2 makes most sense. Capture, capture. Bishop comes out. Capture. And now the king castles queenside, which is a great move because if not, we're going to have some big trouble in the center here, right? So if something like capture, take, we get this discovered attack. We're continuing to attack. So we don't want any of that. So it makes sense to castle here. Bishop goes to d3. And the idea of here is to stop black from simply taking c2. This does a few things. So bishop goes here, and after capture, capture, If we look at black's position, we got rid of that pesky light squared bishop, which would have been really helpful in this game because all the pawns are on dark squares. And we've also opened this file to attack the king. And after black takes, we're expecting rook to take on e5 to keep the position even. But instead, Tarrasch plays rook to c1. And the king has to go to b8. And if we're thinking about that tall game, this is a little surprising. We're in an endgame. Why is this king not stepping up to maybe support these pawns and attack later in the game? Well, if we were to play that, we were to play king to d7, we would simply capture this pawn, and now we're going to go after this pawn. And if we look, this king really can't move. So if the king tries to attack, we go back, and now it goes here defending the pawn. But again, we just bring the other rook in, and now black is in serious trouble. So bringing the king up really isn't an option in this game. And because of that, Edmund Thorold had to play king to b8. And now we have two rooks very well developed. We're going to take here. I really like white's position here because white has more pieces out. And they're going to try to get to this d4 pawn first. So the knight comes out. And now the rooks are stacking up on this e-file. And black goes to exchange rooks. And after capture, we actually go knight takes on e8. Because if rook takes with check, knight takes, and now white gets to that d4 pawn before black gets to the d3 pawn. So there's really no way to save this one pawn advantage in this game. So take. Rook goes over here. We already talked about this with the Capablanca game. Rook to the 7th, right? Just cutting out the king on the 7th rank. And then we're going to go after that d4 pawn. So pawn goes up. Knight goes over here to attack d4. Pawn goes up. Capture. Let's get check. King goes up. And now we have to figure out, do we want to go here and get a fork and start picking up some pawns? Or do we want to protect this d pawn by going to e3? So take a minute and try to think, what's the best course of action here? All right, so the best move is rook to e3. The idea is this is a pass pawn. Let's keep this pass pawn. I don't want to go after these pawns. Black takes here. We take another one. Then we have check. Rook checks, and they start grabbing these pawns because there's a lot of counterplay there. I don't know who's going to win this game. But right now we have an extra pawn, and it's a pass pawn. So we're going to see Tarrasch really make use of this and win the game with that pass pawn. So king's coming out. Rook goes over here, h3. It's hitting that pawn, so they have to defend. And again, black always has a weak pawn on the board. And now king to e3. So we just switched the defender here, which means that my rook can now play a bit more actively. My king's kicking the rook away, and we can push that pawn up the board safely. So we're going to keep trying this. Rook goes behind the pawns. Rook to g3. We're hitting that pawn. We're going to defend. Black really can't go over here, try to hit the b pawn, because we'll just kick them away again. So black has to go back, trading rooks. Black's never going to trade rooks. Good fork, right? So again, we have to be super careful here. Rook to e2. Rook goes back. Pawn to b4. I like how we're making it very simple. 2 pawns and 2 pawns. This is the only pawn here. And then we just got to lock up these pawns somehow. Rook goes back. Rook goes to e5. Rook attacking the g-pawn. And now this is a very nice move again. Playing defense and offense at the same time in this game. Rook goes back. Pawn to h3 is a great waiting move. We're kicking it to black to say, what are you going to do now? King goes up. Check. Now try to find the move here for white. Rook to e5. So the idea is, if we were to take, we still have the pawn advantage, and we get it with check, and we're able to hold that pawn, and then we can lock up here. So this is going to be an easy win for white. So black really can't do that, so they moved the rook back to f6. And now again, we want to find ways to keep going up the board if we can. So pawn to d5. d5 is the best. Again, we've now got to the 5th rank. We're trying to get this pawn all the way to become a queen safely. Easier said than done. So king to d7, they go back. But let's look at some of the other options here. Like, what if rook to f2? What if they try to, grab pawns? Because this is going to happen in especially a lot of blitz games or games when we're in time trouble. we're going to kind of go for these attacks. Just thinking, okay, you could grab this pawn, sure, but I'm going to grab this pawn, and we're going to have a race of some sort. You know, if I can get rid of even one of these pawns, then maybe I can make one of these pawns pass. But this simply loses because after rook to e6, check, king has to move away, and I'm going to take this pawn, defend this pawn, and I'm threatening to take one of these pawns as well. I'm up 2 pawns now as white. This is a wrap, so that's really not an option to kind of get counterplay that way. If we play a5, you know, again, sort of a waiting move, this is really fun because after capture, capture, we can play check, and we give up the pawn here. And if we look, we give up the pawn and black gets opposition, which means black's the one stepping up and making it symmetrical, right? So now white has to move. But the secret is we have 2 pawns that we can move. So we're going to go king over here, and that idea is we're going to go this way. So black really can't go this way because we'll go over here and we'll grab that pawn and we'll promote it first because black is going to have to get rid of 2 pawns, and that's going to take too long. So if we go and we follow and we get to around here, this is where we're going to start to push the pawns. So pawn to h5, sorry, to h4. Black cannot move any pawns here. If they move here, we're just going to take, and this is not a pass pawn because the g pawn has that covered. So now king has to move again, and suddenly they don't have the opposition anymore. It's white that has the opposition. And when the king moves away, king goes here, capture that pawn. It's going to keep pushing, and then we can go after these pawns. So this is a wrap. So white has found some very creative ways to sort of force black into either moving backwards, which is what they do in the game, or simply losing on the spot. So rook to g5, rook goes up, rook goes back. Again, a great waiting move. You got to move the king back now. The rook's got nowhere to go. The rook can't really go up or down because we're going to take this pawn. So king to e7, rook over here, always offering a trade. King over here, rook goes back. The threat was rook check, king takes, and then we take this rook, and this pawn is going to promote. So just to show that, check, take, you know, they can move pawns here, nothing's going to happen, capture, capture, and then king here, and how do you stop this pawn from becoming a queen? So again, always forcing black to play backwards. Pawn goes here, check. This is a great move. It's the same threat that we had before. It looks like rook can just take, and the position would be even, but not quite because we have that check. And again, we're just going to promote. So instead, king goes to d7, rook checks. King has to go to c8. If king goes to c6, white has a great move here. It's a simple checkmate. We got a lot of pieces involved in this attack, and it's checkmate. So black doesn't want to lose. They play king to c8. Rook goes to c7 check. And now it's time to use this king and promote the pawn. So pawn push with d7. Rook has to get out of the way. King goes to e7. We're 1 move away from promoting. Check. King goes up here. And now, again, in 1 move, we're going to have a promoted queen. The rook is cutting off the king from defense, which means we only have 1 move to play. Rook to h8. And now rook to e2. So the idea of rook to e2, if black plays something like capture, we're simply going to play check. It's a fork. If black captures, we get a queen. If they do nothing, we take their rook. So it's game over. Is there anything else black could do? Let's see. Could they go over here? Well, now it's not a fork. It's a pin, right? And the king cannot come over to help the rook because the pawn and king are here. If they take, we get a queen. If they decide not to take, we get a rook with check. And now, again, we're going to go and we're going to promote. We don't have to worry about this pawn because we're so close to getting checkmate. And even if it got over here, again, we could stop that pawn if we really needed to. But again, in this position, we have checkmate first. So this was a great game because Tarrasch made it look simple. You know, when you're winning by a pawn, you know, just promote. But it really isn't that simple. There's a lot of ways for both white and black to go wrong in this endgame. And it's a great, you know, if this is your first time seeing the French defense, you know, consider playing the Tarrasch because you can play pawn to c3. play e5, play like a normal French defense, but your knight is not getting in the way. So it certainly is a fun way to change things up.